the second of our series of the Wednesday webinars for the win. And this one's going to be a little different than last one. And all together, they'll make up uh, episodes of this series. This is about the petition to the Fish and Game Commission, the 2023-23 MPA AM1, which is the amendment number 1. And this is in advance of a meeting that's on April 21st at the Elks Lodge in San Mateo. Let me click on, there we go. So the last webinar that we did was last Wednesday on April Fool's Day, the 1st, and there's a video recording of it, and that is available on our YouTube page as well. And that was about kelp history and the recent kelp loss. And this episode today will be the April 8th episode, which is about the Lover's Point urchin experiment and the Tanker's Reef project, which I'm sure, Brian, you know all about that one. And then next Wednesday, we'll have the April 15th episode, and it'll be about the current restoration effort going forward and about evolving policy and warming ocean conditions. And all of these webinars will include the kelp restoration petition. So who am I? I am Keith Rutzar. I'm the executive director of the membership nonprofit, the 501c3 California corporation called the California Kelp Restoration Corps. And I'm the executive director of that. And there are 4 other board of directors, Peter Ottersbach, Michelle Allen, Mary Jo Nelson, and Bruce Watkins. So this is a summary of the April 1st webinar about the kelp loss. And basically, the backstory is that there was a lot of kelp all around this peninsula, and those became urchin barrens. And that's the arrow here. And now the problem is that Monterey Peninsula is ringed by marine protected areas where the urchins went into these places and became protected from us being able to go there and do kelp restoration efforts. So this is about the Lover's Point urchin experiment. And this was a reef check scientific collecting permit. So scientific collecting permits are a little different. They're based on scientific criteria. There has to be controls and a thesis, a question that you're trying to answer. And we had this collecting permit from August 13th of 2018 to August 13th of 2021. But on September 30th of 2020, we had to abandon the project. And the reason why is because the California Department of Fish and Wildlife would not allow us an amendment to take more red urchins. We were only allowed to take 1,000 red urchins per year, and that was just not enough. So we had to stop doing it for that reason. So a little bit about what happened is from 2006, and this chart only goes to 2017, but we were monitoring the urchin barrens and kelp around the Monterey Peninsula at all of these sites, and 8 of the sites became urchin barrens. And what we found is that if you look at the kelp along that, it was kind of going along at a normal rate, and then we had this marine heat wave, and the whole kelp forest just kind of dropped off a cliff right there, and the urchins went up. And if you look at where those 2 lines cross, it's right here. And the number of urchins at that point where they crossed is 6 urchins per square meter. And the scientific literature says that in order to make it reverse from an urchin barren back to a kelp forest, you need to do an order of magnitude lower the urchin count an order of magnitude. So what that becomes is 0.6 urchins per square meter is our theoretical threshold density when an urchin barren could revert back to a kelp forest. So with that in mind, we started this project up at Lover's Point. So to kind of familiarize yourself with where that is in the wild world, the Lover's Point Urchin Experiment is up here in Pacific Grove at Lover's Point. And there's another project I'm going to tell you about later. So just to get you both oriented on this site, this is the Tankers Reef restoration site over here off of in Monterey, off of Del Monte Beach. So this is a zoomed in view of that site. We were doing it within a project boundary off of Lovers Point. So Lovers Point's over here, and offshore, this is where we had to go and do the project. And so we scouted it out. We found a bunch of reefs that were 20 reefs that were surrounded by sand. That was one of the main features of them because we know the urchins don't like to cross sand very well. And the reefs, they ranged in size from 13 square meters, the very small one, to 68 square meters, which was our biggest one. And we manipulated the urchin densities in this range of uh, 0.075 per square meter to 21 per square meter. We found that the bat was like the background density, about 21 per square meter. It ended up at the end of the project being about 25 urchins per square meter. And we started out in May of 2019, and we did 16 passes around the site. So these little yellow pins right here are where the reefs are. And we called it a star map, where you could start at the one and then travel to the next one and make your way around this little constellation here and over to number 20. I put where the kelp was, this little Christmas trees, because they don't have Google Earth does not have a kelp symbol, and I couldn't figure out how to add one. So that's where the kelp was located. And that's significant because you kind of need some kelp to get some kelp. And we had some kelp form over here and over here, but it's because there was kelp that was available as reproductive nearby. And these red lines right here are the reef check surveys, where we went with reef check surveyors and we surveyed the adjacent site 3 times during the course of this. We also counted the fish. We looked for the ecological effect of what we were doing out here and to see if kelp would form somewhere else, even outside of where we were doing the work. And some of these had prescriptions, and some of them had there were controls. We didn't do anything to them, just so we could see what the effect was. And this is us going out there. This is the original team right here. I had very short hair back in the day, and also a lot of slates. It was kind of we were doing a lot of work here. This was Wendy, Nicholas, Stephen, myself, Jessica, Shizay, Chow, and Linda. They were the original crew out here, and we went and did the original manipulations. And the way we had planned on doing it, and this is what we brought out to the site, was a little easel, and we told people how to do it. So there's 2 different methods depending on what the prescription was. When the prescription was very large, we'd use method A, where we would go over the reef and we would count. We divide the reef, whatever the formation was, in two with 2 transect tapes, and divide it into quarters. And everybody was given an assignment. We'd have 4 divers, and they would go and count all of the urchins within the site. Obviously, David Sherman joined us. I think David did this back in the day. And then we would go, and after we had counted them, then we would do some math underwater and determine at how many urchins was each person allowed to call within their area to get them down to the prescription number. And when the urchin numbers prescription was very low, we would do method B, where we would just take so many urchins off of the reef and set them aside, set them on the sand somewhere. And we had to kind of not bias ourselves and take urchins that were about the medium size for the ones that were on the reef. Otherwise, you would get progressively larger or smaller ones, depending on how your bias is. And then we set them aside and then we would go with our hammers and go and remove all the urchins within our quadrants, and then we would redistribute the number of urchins back on equally back onto the site. And we did that in a rotation for all 20 of the reefs, and we did that about every 3 weeks for the entire summer. And the way we figured out how it would work with people and being able to do this in a way that would make sense to us, we actually got a little piñata here. You can see the piñata, and knocked it with a bat and spread the urchin puffballs all over this little, what we call the little rock, was a rope laid on the park. This is at Lover's Point. And then we all practiced going down and counting along the lines, and trying to count only the puffballs and not the other things that we saw on little tubes and stuff. We left some other things on here to see how that would work. And here's pictures of us all counting it and try to see compared to each other how close we could get to an agreeable number on that reef. This is May 18th of 2019. This is the first day of our work. And this is what it looked like when you do this underwater. So there's transit tapes crossed over the reef, and here are our divers going through and counting their quadrant, their assignment. Um, it's very difficult to kind of coordinate things underwater, so everyone kind of has to know what they're doing when you get going. And it's also math is hard underwater. When you're in, everyone gets a little fuzzy. It's kind of funny, even in like 45 feet of water. It's hard to do math. I don't recommend it. And what we found is that on our lowest density target, and this is number 18, and this is in about 45 feet of water or so. This is number 18. We have little tags on it, so we positively identify the site, make sure we were on it. And on this site, we had two giant kelps survive on the site. And they grew right there, and the density was very low. Like it would average a very low number, and you kind of average over time, because as soon as you leave the site, more urchins come onto the site. So this is what our initial callings looked like. This is the first 6 passes. We did 16 passes on the site. Initially, there was on this reef 734 urchins, and then the next pass they got lower, and it went up a little bit here. But when you normalize, we make a migration rate. We normalize for time between callings, and we found that the migration rate decreased over time as the summer went along. And the kelp responded as first there was nothing, and then we got two bull kelp. The Nereocystis formed, and then in the holdfast of the Nereocystis, there formed two Macrocystis plants. And the Macrocystis plants, there was two, and then there was four, and then one of the bull kelps, it went away. I don't know. Who knows what happened? Disappeared. And then we had four macro kelp on the site. The thing when you're doing something of this size and you're only getting four Macrocystis, it doesn't have a lot of statistical power, and that was kind of the problem with this project. We knew that it would work, but it didn't have something that was scientifically you could hang your hat on and say, oh, it came back tons, right? So this is all the sites, and you could see where kelp was seen on the site. And this one here, very low density. We had 6 brown algae holdfast, and it persisted till the next year, right? And this is me pointing at it the next year, and I said out loud, "Hey, look, Ma, I grew kelp." And the other ones, they had some kelp, but it didn't last very long on the site. So what we had figured out from doing this is the results of this experiment, this 2-year experiment, is that the new kelp would not survive except where we had very low urchin density. And that was less than 0.5 urchins per square meter. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Ocean Protection Council, they like to say that the threshold density is 2 urchins per square meter, but I don't really know what that means, because how big is the urchin, right? And I think the number is much lower than that, lower than 2 urchins per square meter. But when we were working on other projects and they set that threshold density for us to obtain it, I didn't want to argue with them and say, no, it must be lower. We'll just take the 2 as a measure of success. And we also learned that the red urchins must also be removed. What we found is we were manipulating purples only, and the red urchins would come and we would not bother them, and they just took over the space. And so it became an unfair contest where there was 350 red urchins on a reef and only 2 very scared purple urchins. And so we were not allowed to remove the reds in great numbers. So we had to stop the project. It wasn't even a fair contest at that point. And the biggest takeaway was that the recreational divers could do it. We had 45 reef check divers that came out and did the work on this. And I mean, they're really good divers, but we would learn that divers could come out regularly and manipulate the urchin count and have a successful project out here. So that was really encouraging to us that it could be done. Tankers Reef. So Tankers Reef was different. It was not a scientific collecting permit. In a scientific collecting permit, you're not allowed to manipulate any particular species significantly. And that's exactly what we want to do is go and remove a bunch of urchins and have a result. So this was actually done by a sport fishing regulation amendment to the Fish and Game Commission. And the project period was from April 1st of 2021 to April 1st of 2024. But when we did this, we asked for a restoration project. We didn't ask for a research project. There was a research project associated with this, but that was not our main focus for us. And we first were talking with our research partners, and we were going to report it out every year in hopes that we could get into a better place in the coming years. But on July 30th, the Fish and Wildlife and Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary announced their intention to sunset the project against our wishes. We wanted to continue it. And so, but they insisted that it be done for the sake of the research, that we had to stop the project so that they could see if the urchins would actually eat it after the divers stopped. Spoiler. 2020, we started the project. Here's the giant kelp restoration project at Tankers Reef. Here's Brian. Brian's on the call today. Awesome, Brian. Jen, there's myself, Amelie, and Kevin. We had meetups. I think we had 16, or maybe I'm using the same number twice, meetups at the condos, and we would go out from shore and do it, and we do it off the beach hopper too. And we were able to do a lot of work with our group. And it was a different certification. It was not reef check divers. This was a PADI and a NAUI certification that people learned on their own expense to be certified to do this work. And this is the project site. So out at Del Monte Beach, there is a big shale reef out here. You can see it in the bathymetry here from Cal State University, Monterey Bay. They provided this. And there is the area they provided to us from the regulation was this big red box around here. And we divided it in half and said, okay, on this side of the line, we're not going to do any work over here. No culling on the control area. And we would do the work only on this side here, on the west side of that part. And this center area is a big fault line, and a bunch of sand dollars are in it. So it was a real obvious place to separate the two. The mustard color in this depiction here is where historically kelp has been found over the last 30 years. Kelp has formed in these places, so we knew it was possible within this area. We did a lot of reconnaissance, and we determined that this place was the place to put down the cable grid. The cable grid is 2.5 acres in that spot, and when we got there in April of 2021, so April, kelp first came to this place, and it was just on this side of a little bit north of the cable grid. And that's a good place for it because the swell in this is always coming from top to bottom, from the northwest is where the swell is coming. So that kelp, we needed some kelp in the project for the research goals, And the idea was to uh, cull the urchins in the area down current from the kelp and see if we can get the kelp to go there. And this star is where we would enter from the beach, and uh, and then we'd also enter from the harbor by boat. We could get out there. This is what the underwater cable grid looks like. There is this is 100 meters by 100 meters, and all along the head rope there are little numbered tags, and the numbered tags range from A to K. And this is 100 meters, 330 feet. So every 10 meters, there was this dividing line. It was made, first we made it of Dacron, thinking that that would be a good divider, but was not because the urchins ate the lines. The lines got like brown algae on them, and the urchins ate it. And so they disappeared pretty quickly. Uh, Also in the field, there was little bolts that are not really shown here, but we were able to restring it that way. And then in the center of this bowling lane, 330-foot long lane, there was a tape measure that was permanently there. It was 100 meters long. And so the divers would go down on the mooring ball. There would be a boat up here sometimes, and go down to their assignment and get the assignment online and go down the line, uh, counting how many urchins they called, how much time it took for them to do it, and how much distance they traveled. So that gave us a work rate. So now we knew what the diver work rates were over time. And you didn't necessarily have to count urchins. I didn't count urchins, but Brian did. And the by knowing what Brian did and his work rate, that would establish what the going work rate was for everybody else. And we had a kind of a formula, a look back formula, and we would be able to tell how many urchins approximately we were working in the site. And then we also did a deal where we had a single buoy and we just stretched out a cable, and we would have different lanes. There's tags on it, A, B, C, D, and we would just kind of imagine where the lanes were and just venture off in this direction. We found that we had to run the lines kind of north because that's where the swell was predominantly coming from. And if we didn't go north, then the cable itself would become moved with the currents and to get tangled. So those are the two methods that we had done at Tankers Reef. And this is kind of how it started. This is the grid underwater here. Here's the corners. We had buoys on the corners so you can visually see it on the surface where they were. We had a white buoy, we had an orange buoy, we had a gray buoy, we had 7 buoys on the water. And we would do assignments, and people would go and call the urchins on all of these sites. So we would go on the corner, and sometimes people would go around the outside or go down the lanes, and we started charting where people were underwater, and that told us the when to go back. We'd have doing them in rotation, and then we start over again and do it again. And we went way out here and did work and tried to keep this giant kelp forest. The brown color is the giant kelp forest, and the purple is where the urchins are. And we had kelp over here too at that time. So this is what the data looks like. Our data is collected through Salesforce, and over the course of the work, we had 749,000 urchins were removed from the site. And this one's kind of interesting to me is that the green is when we were working on the grid, and the gray is when we were working around the grid. The majority of our time we were working around the grid. So the reef check data shows the increase in kelp over time on the site, and the decline of urchins on the site over time. And this is when we started, and this is when we stopped on the reef. And the control, the urchins kind of stayed the same. There was a little bit of variation, and there was only like one kelp, and it was very scared. And we also, with reef check data, you can also check out the other response to it, the fish and all the other invertebrates that happen when you have this kind of effort. Good data done by a whole nother effort from a lot of reef check divers did that work for us, and very grateful to them for that. This is what the kelp restoration site looks like from a drone done by Cal State University, Monterey Bay. This is the drone area. that I want to draw your attention to. That's where the drone went over the whole thing. But this is where the kelp forest was when we first got there in April, and you can see the little boat right there, on the mooring ball, and you can see the kelp is kind of to the north of it, and then you can see how we moved it. So there's the boat again, and now the kelp forest is over here in the area where we called the urchins. That's where they became more kelp. And this is what it looks like from 200 feet. There's the boat right there, and here is the kelp forest all out in this area. Very nice. Worked. So our plan in 2024 was to keep working on this. We had the grid. This area in the dark brown here is where we had kelp living on the reef. And our idea was to keep going out and try to make that kelp forest grow out there in that 8 acres again. But what happened was Department of Fish and Wildlife said that they wanted us to stop working it and for us to go in a place 100 meters away from the site. And so we tried doing that. We stopped working on the grid and we set up on the orange buoy over here and put a single line down. And we went and called in this area. We came out and we did a really good job doing it, but it was really kind of hard because we were kind of pressed and there wasn't as many people involved at this time. And we only saw a new kelp right here. That was the only kelp we saw. And we thought, well, this is just not going to work. And so we stopped doing it at the end of that season in 2023. And at the sunset period in April of 2024, this is the only kelp that remained, was only this section of the grid that was on the east side. And there was some patches out here of some giant kelp, but this was kind of all that remained out in this area. And then we found that in August of 24, that same season, that where we had called out here, there was now kelp. Kelp had grown and expanded outward, going out where we had worked, which was really encouraging because it had moved against the direction of the swell. It went counter to the current. So that was really encouraging at that time in 2024. But then in January of this year, what we found is that kelp had receded. The urchins kept coming in from the north. Brian and I went out and there was just red urchins out here, big fields of them, and they came into the site and ate the kelp over here. And only 1.5 acres of kelp remained just on the southern edge of our grid, and a little bit over here. And I was out there on Monday of this week and found there's only 0.5 acres of kelp left at this point. So what does that do? We need to get and expand this into more areas, and that's where our 2023 MPA restoration petition comes in. So we've been trying a long time to get the California Fish and Game Commission to allow us to do this work. In 2017, Bruce Watkins and I submitted a petition to do urchin removals, and that was denied. And then we revised it and resubmitted in January of 2019, as someone from Fish and Wildlife advised us to do. And then that was denied in the place. So, but that was just me going there and asking for this thing and not bringing all the people with us. So then in 2020, we asked the Fish and Game Commission. We had a lot of people come and help. We had a bunch of people write letters. There was 260 letters to the commission, and it was overwhelming support. And that's how our project became legal in 2020. And the set for April 1st for us to begin for a 3-year period on April 1st of 2021. And that worked for a while until the Fish and Game CDFW, Fish and Wildlife, decided they wanted to cancel our project. So expansion was proposed in November of 2021, and that was denied. We denied a kelp restoration management permit, which is something that's allowed for on land, but not in the water. That was denied. We tried a scientific collecting permit, like we had done at Reef Check, and that was denied. They keep on making our area smaller and smaller until it wasn't even something doable. And then in 2023, we advanced a decadal management review petition, and that's what we're proposing here. I'm going to talk about in a little bit here. And that's in consideration, and maybe this year that could happen. We also in 2024 advanced a recreational airlift tool to be a recreational tool, but that was denied for recreational use. And then also did a urchin culling. We asked for urchin culling in all the coastal counties, and that was denied as well. So the 2023-23 MPA petition is to using these marine protected areas allow a different kind of use within these areas. And the areas that we're talking about are the Ed Ricketts State Marine Conservation Area, the Pacific Grove Gardens State Marine Conservation Area, Carmel Bay State Marine Conservation Area, and Point Lobos State Marine Reserve. So reserves are kind of different than conservation areas. Reserves are have more restrictions on fishing. You're not allowed to do any fishing for fish or anything in a state marine reserve. And also in our new one, we wanted to make at Tankers Reef, we're going to make it a reserve so that this can be a de facto restoration research site for a long time. So there was a study that was done as part of the research for the Decadal Management Review done by UC Santa Cruz and Jen Cassell down in Santa Barbara. And that is to look at the coast and say, well, where should we do this effort? And looking at the kelp and the history of kelp, where we might get a high priority and do this work. So regardless of access or conservation status. So they aligned with what we were talking about. The Tankers Reef site, there was high priority. The Ed Ricketts was a lesser priority, but here's the legend for it. And then at Pacific Grove Gardens, this was a high priority. This whole section right here, it usually has persistent kelp. And then out here in Carmel Bay, for some reason, the Point Lobos State Marine Reserve doesn't have any information. I don't know why they didn't do that when I asked and did not get an answer. So that's where scientifically is the best place for kelp. So our 2023 MPA kelp restoration management protection areas, what we're asking for is to do it in these small areas. So Ed Ricketts is 146 acres, Pacific Grove Gardens 628, Carmel Bay is a little bigger, 1,408 acres, and Point Lobos only 34 acres of that. And Sukilta is a total of 193 acres. So we're asking to do work in 2,410 acres, which is only a small portion of the total MPAs in California, only 0.44. These marine protected areas don't go out to the full 3-mile state waters limit. They are only kind of designed around the kelp forest when they were creating the MPAs. So what we want to do in these areas is to do culling urchins with recreational divers, get a hammer like we were doing before. We know it works. It's easier than trying to pick them up for us. Also, let's be smart about it and let's bait and trap the urchins. Have the urchins come to us, pick them up in little traps and remove them from the area that way. And then we want to use commercial harvest of the purple urchins for urchin ranching. So in these places, we're able to take the urchins that are big enough, put them into the ranching effort, and then in 10 to 12 weeks, they become food, and we can sell them to people. We want to manage, and the small ones become compost. And then we want to manage acid weed. We found a lot of acid weed grows when you have an urchin barren, and you want to be able to manage that so that the kelp has room to grow and not get tangled up in something with a very high acid content of the leaves. And remove invasive species. We have invasive species on the site. We're always looking out for Sargassum horneri. It's been found in the area, and we want to be on the lookout for that and have a rapid response to remove that if that happens. Kelp planting and kelp transplanting is also something we want to do. So if we could get kelp to grow in a lab, we can go and put it out on the reef and transplant it there, or we could there's different techniques where you put kelp on little gravels and put them out there. Another possibility. Kelp canopy management by pruning is another one that we like to do. So it's a normal function of kelp to have the canopy pruned, and when it is pruned back, the kelp throws up another stipe, and it makes it more resilient. And also suspend the fishing in the restoration areas in the MPAs at that time because we don't need to have a conflict with the fishermen. There's no benefit to fishing in the middle of a kelp restoration project and pulling out functioning parts randomly and not documenting it when you're trying to know what the ecological effect is of the restoration effort. And also artificial reefs. There's made structures, there's designs that this is the only one approved in California right now. This is by Sea Caves, and they're interlocking concrete structures with a special kind of concrete that doesn't leach out into the environment. And you can see how they're put down underwater, and then kelp starts to grow on top of them. It's like a blank slate. Kind of nice because then you have like a zero starting point, and you're able to monitor the same place exactly over time. Set up buoys in the water for the hardest challenge in all of this is knowing where in the world you are. And so we need to have some buoys and cable systems underwater so that we can be able to direct the effort. And also the idea of adopting a reef. This is something that was actually suggested by the Fish and Game Commission that we have like an exclusive long-term stakeholder, like you would adopt a highway or something. You don't need to have people randomly coming and doing the work. You want to have just a single organization doing it and coordinating all the effort. So, and another thing was to create a kelp restoration portal with a new permitting decision tree. So we had proposed this in the our restoration, our MPA permit proposal, and this is something that is actually kind of morphed into something different called the Kelp Restoration Management Permit, which I'm sorry, Kelp Restoration Management Plan, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But there's already a portal to for people to put in their scientific collecting permit. It's called the Scientific Collecting Permit Portal, and we propose just make another one for restoration permits and just kind of rebrand, edit it a little bit and have a different decision tree. And you don't have to create Fish and Wildlife doesn't have to create a new infrastructure to manage these permits. And then if you're doing that, you also make a similar portal for the tribes and tribal communities to have permits for their work for subsistence fishing and ceremonial use of the resources instead of trying to write in words into all these different places where it's allowed. That way it can be accommodated much better. So when we proposed this, we had objections. And one of the objections was from the Monterey Abalone Company, one of our partners. And their objection was that if this became reserves, we were trying to make these into reserves, then they wouldn't be able to harvest the kelp, which is not what's good for kelp canopy. You need to be able to prune it to make it good. So that was their objection. And then the recreational fishers said, well, if you make it a reserve, we'll never get it back because it's too hard to ask the commission to make a state marine reserve back to what it was before when you're done. So we said, okay, we will make these places not state marine reserves. We'll make them remain as state marine conservation areas. But while a restoration management permit is in effect, we will suspend fishing during that time. And some other little change, aligning the names of our permit that we wanted with the kelp restoration management plan, which is being made. But then we got a letter from everybody saying that wasn't going to work for them because if it's intermittent in the area, it'd be too confusing. People wouldn't know when the restoration management plan was in effect. That people would be confused by having this conservation area where they couldn't fish. And so what we said, well, okay, well, let's just keep it as a reserve and let it be that there's no fishing in here permanently. And I mean, eventually, if they can prove that the fishing is beneficial to kelp, then they can ask the Fish and Game Commission at the next decadal management review in 10 years to open it up for fishing again. And if fishing is beneficial to kelp, I'll probably help them. That'd be great. And we have to make it so that in these areas, we change these rules for harvesting kelp that in the state marine reserve, you can harvest kelp. So here's Monterey, and our intention is to go all the way down the coast of California, all the way to Morro Bay. And there's different ways that we could do this. And one of the ways is a fishing pathway where we take fish commercially outside the marine protected areas. And the recreational use is like it is right now, where we only take 35 urchins outside of the marine protected areas. There's another way, and this is what I think that this is coming up, and this is the petition that we're asking for right now, where you change the regulations in these areas to allow restoration in these marine protected areas. So that would get us started right in here, but it would be location specific. The other way would be to have a permit from the Kelp Restoration Management Plan that we talked about. And that could be implemented in 2028. But likely, the way they're writing it, the way they're thinking, they will probably exclude all the marine protected areas from the Kelp Restoration Management Plan because that's kind of their thinking. Another one is the Restoration Management Plan, which they said they are developing that, but they've never used it. So that would be another way to do it. And also there's a letter of authorization, which is a discretionary letter that the Marine Region Director could just write a letter and say, you can do it right there. And that's perfectly within the law for them to do that. So there's multiple ways to do it, and we'll try to work that out at this meeting. So there are some objections we have to the whole process is that, this problem happened 2015 is when it first originated. So it's been a decade of denial from the department for all of this. And betraying the public and especially the volunteer divers is really not very helpful. Or disincentivizing the people that want to help by destroying our biodiversity for the sake of research. And the marine protection area, the MLPA goal is conservation of biodiversity, and it's not a suicide pact. And that's what we see happening now, where they believe that these places are never to be disturbed, and that let the termites eat the house if they want to, and that's a non-starter for I think every diver doesn't want to see that happen. And this petition that we're proposing, there's 9 other petitions that are in this same bucket, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife denied all 10 of them at the same time. The future of the Kelp Restoration Management Plan is a secret process. No one knows what it says. They will not have a draft, and there's no public review of a draft until 2027. They will not, probably not, say they will not, as far as we can tell, allow restoration in marine protected areas. And also, it's controlled by discretionary permits, right? So Fish and Wildlife could decide who gets them and under what restrictions they are allowed to do. So all of that kind of has to be negotiated into what we have going forward. Lots to discuss. And on our webpage, if you go to it, you will come across on the home page this section of it, which is Help the Kelp. And you can learn more about it and learn about the regional decadal management meeting at the Elks Lodge in San Mateo, April 21st at 8 a.m. And you can help us by going and adding your name to our list by going onto this Google form and adding your name, saying a little bit about why you support the petition. And you can see this event and all the others in our calendar. And you can get to this on our website. And you can also donate to the cause if you like. And there's the plug for our next webinar, which is going to be next Wednesday on April 15th. And we're going to talk about our current restoration efforts going forward and also evolving policy and ocean conditions. There's a super El Nino forecast. Spoiler. But we're going to work through it. And that's it.